to have Patrick as a postdoc at ISFA. He joined us in September. I'm personally very happy for that because we are both collaborators and friends. And so today's talk will be about modeling life insurance with fast type distributions. So Patrick, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Thanks everybody for coming today. My talk is going to be not a very traditional seminar because I thought I'd use the opportunity to talk about some of my background so that you know what I know and you can use me more effectively at the department, and also to use many photos of kangaroos because you have to sit through a lot of English, so I'm sorry for that. So this is the summary of me very quickly. My background was originally software engineering before I moved over to probability theory. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And I guess my supervisors, you might know, Søren Asmussen, he's visiting in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And in Brisbane, my supervisor for my PhD was Phil Pollitt. This is just a word cloud of what my PhD thesis ended up, my final PhD thesis was. But anyway, onto the topic of phase type distributions and life insurance. And it all started when my supervisor Søren was visiting Melbourne. He just sent this email. Oh, I have some problem. I need your help with C++, basically the email reads. There's some application with Wiener Hopf identities for levy processes and life insurance applications. So sure, that sounds fine. So the part of the paper that he wanted to give me was very simple. The problem was take a life table and just fit a distribution to it. So it wasn't even a real life table, just an illustrative life table from this textbook, Bowers et al. And that's what if you plot the PDF of the life table looks like. And he just wanted to fit a phase type distribution to this data. And they already had written these papers in the 90s which give an algorithm that fits phase type distributions and released the code that does it. So at the time I was conflicted because I thought, yes, this is going to be so easy and I'll get another publication from it. And at the same time I was thinking, oh no, I'll have contributed so little to this paper that I don't deserve to be a co-author on it. And then all my trouble started after that. But before I get into what happened, I'll just go over what are phase type distributions and some of the properties. I don't know, they're very popular in Brisbane, but one thing I've learned is what's popular in one university is totally unheard of in the next university. So I don't know if anyone here knows of them. They're just a distribution that are derived from a Markov chain. So if you have, say, a continuous time Markov chain here, so your chain is moving between states 1, 2, 3, and this is dagger is the terminating state. It bounces around and you count how long it takes to hit that terminating state, and that is one instance of the phase type random variable. So that, for example, if you looked at this is just running, say, I think it's something like 7 Markov chains at once. On the y-axis is the phase that the Markov chain is in, and then once it hits the terminating state, that's state 0 and it stays there. So if you look at the points, the times when it hits 0, they're instances of this phase type random variable. And so you specify them by saying, what's the distribution of where you start, the alpha, and how do you transition, how quickly do you transition between the different areas. So that's just what I said. So what's nice about it is if you have something that you're modeling with a phase type, you can write down all these properties, like the probability density function is very simple to write down. The survival function is very simple. All the moments you can write down. The moment generating function you can write down. They all rely on this one thing, which is the matrix exponential. So this is a bit of a pain to compute. It's just one line of MATLAB or Python or whatever. It takes a little bit of time because there's a bit of work in doing it. Anyway, so it's the matrix exponential is just defined as the Taylor series expansion if you jam in a matrix into the middle. And maybe it seems very exotic, this distribution, but it generalizes many simple distributions, like the exponential distribution is a very simple phase type distribution. So if you get a bunch of exponentials independent and add them up together, then you get an airline distribution, which is a subtype of a phase type. Or even you take a mixture of exponentials. Most of these simple distributions that have anything to do with exponential distributions can be put as a phase type. And the main benefit in my eyes of using these things is that the class of all phase type distributions is dense in the space of distributions of positive random variables. So that means you have some positive random variable that you want to approximate. I can find the phase type that gets arbitrarily close to it to do the approximation. And so you get very close to your target and also have the theoretical benefits that I just mentioned. Oh, and other nice properties is, say, if you add together different phase types, then you again get a phase type. Or if you take the minimum of two phase types or the maximum, you get another phase type. Or if you condition on the phase type being bigger than some value, like the remaining life of it is also phase type distributed. One kind of bizarre fact is you can approximate a deterministic number with the phase type random variable. This might sound totally pointless, but I'll mention a use later, where instead of this constant t, for whatever reason you need a phase type that looks just like that constant t. So if you take an airline distribution and you take this limit as n gets larger, then you'll converge to that constant. Anyway, so I've said a few good things. Time for some bad things to say about this distribution. So the representation is not unique. So here is just a simple example of two different matrices that look like they define two different phase type random variables, but they're actually the same. If you can relabel the phases. That's a really simple example of getting the same distribution in two different ways. And the other problem is if you're just given some matrix here for the transitions, it's not so simple to tell that it actually produces a valid phase type variable. It can be that the terminating state is never reached. Like you go in loops forever, for example, and you have an atom at infinity. Just from the practical thing that I struggled with is there's lots of parameters that you need to fit. If you're using this you've got some data, which was my problem, a life table, and I wanted to fit a kind of large-sized phase type distribution, you can have lots of parameters to deal with. So if you leave the transitions to be totally arbitrary, you have like order p squared things you need to fit. So basically this whole matrix. The simplest way to get around that is to enforce some structure on the Markov chain. You say the Markov chain, say in the Coxian distribution, it always starts at phase 1, and then from phase 1 it either dies, goes straight to the terminating condition, or goes to phase 2. And then from phase 2 it either dies or goes to phase 3. And that way you still have a lot of benefits. It's still very flexible, but you have far less parameters that you need to deal with. And so you go from order P squared down to order P parameters. So this last one is the style that we were using in our paper, the generalized Coxean, which is to say that you can enter the Markov chain begins at any phase, it can die at any phase, but if it's not dying, it's only going up one phase at a time, okay, I to I plus 1, or so on, up to P. And so there's two different conceptual ways to use this distribution. The way we're using it is just as each of these phases, the Markov chain itself and the number of phases, they're just mathematical constructs. So the number of phases is just a parameter that lets you choose between how accurately you want to fit your target, and you can make it smaller if you want to avoid overfitting your data. So that's the way we've been looking at this, but other papers, especially the two previous papers that we could find that used phase types in life insurance, they actually added some meaning to each of the phases. So in the original paper here by Lin and Liu, they were doing the same problem where they were fitting a phase type to like the human lifetime, how many years we're going to live, and they say had 200 phases that the human went through, and they interpreted that to mean that the human body had 200 physiological states. That when you're born at state 1, and your body progresses at some random speed to state 2 as you're aging, and at each of those states you have a different. They could change the chance of dying at different physiological states, and then even though it's not here, there's another fantastic paper in the same field that adds to the glory of France along these lines. So back to the problem that we actually had. You're the insurance company. You want to price this insurance product, which is an equity-linked payout. So your customer lives for an unknown amount of time, tau. The payout when they die is linked to some stock price or some asset price, ST. And there's many different payouts that you can have at that random termination time. So, like a simple one is guaranteed minimum benefit is when they, at the time of death, they look at the stock price of the underlying asset and they say, this is what you're going to get. But if it's too small, then they give you the guaranteed minimum, capital K. Or this high water benefit is a sort of more fun problem, which it looks at the time of death. It goes back through the history of the equity, and it considers from the time that the contract was signed to the time of death, what was the maximum value of that asset, and then your payout is either that or some function related to that. And then so the insurer needs to price this, so they want to get the payout, which is we're assuming some function of the running maximum of the stock and the final stock value at the random termination time, discounted back to present value. So in the very simple case, say just ludicrously simple case, we'll say that people live for an exponentially distributed amount of time. Your stock price is this e to the xt, where xt is some Brownian motion. So this is Black-Scholes formula, basically. Then, because Brownian motion is just so well known, like you can look these results up, and it's that the maximum, the running maximum at that random time is exponentially distributed, and also the difference between the final value and then the running maximum is again exponentially distributed, and those two things are independent from each other. And the rates are very simple. They're written there. So this is a product of the one application of the Wiener-Hopf factorization, which is this is the thing that Søren Asmussen was so excited about. He was working on this, and that started this whole problem. So the original Wiener-Hopf factorization looks at this problem where you stop at an exponential, like your customer dies after exponentially distributed amount of time, but your stock price is driven by a levy process instead. So it's like a more generalized Brownian motion. And in that case, you have this same property, which is the running maximum and the final value are kind of independent from each other, and you can calculate this distribution. So they, well, I should say who they are. Soren and another extremely talented mathematician, Yevgeny Ivanov's. I think perhaps some people know him here. He did his PhD in Lausanne not too long ago, so I imagine you guys have met him. Anyway, he's now a professor at Aarhus University in Denmark, in the same place as Soren. And they sort of generalized this very old result, in that instead of just an exponential time, they said if you look at tau being a phase type distributed time, you can come up with some similar kind of result, looking at a levy process and its running maximum over this time. And so that's so basically they had the theory and they wanted to actually use some application for it. So that's why I was brought in. So to give a short summary of my little tale of failure on this project, I first started. I just wanted to fit this life table. Remember, it should be so simple to do, and the code is already there. So the way to use the code is you find this extremely old-looking website, which is Soren's personal homepage, and you dig down, and the code is just camping there. So it's just a .c file, which is the main algorithm implemented there, some PostScript file with the bare minimum explanation of what is going on, and a MATLAB file which takes the result of your fit and does some plots, because they didn't have they couldn't plot anything from C directly. So this is the C file. You can see latest corrections made 1998. So this is not new software, and it's I don't know if you've seen a lot of C code, but there really should be some comments in here explaining what the hell is going on, and there isn't. The whole thing is just totally devoid of any help. And like, for example, I was trying to find out what was going on here, and I would see this function come up like, oh, something is set to random, and in any sensible setup, this would be a random uniform number between 0 and 1. But they define it to be a random number between 0.1 and 1 in the code, for example. And there's lots of these tiny little annoyances that I had to deal with. Anyway, the result was that we tried a few different structures, and this was as close as we could get using the original code. Maybe that doesn't look so bad, but I knew that these phase types were dense. So I should be able to make a phase type that hits that target perfectly. That's what I was trying to do. I didn't care about overfitting. The data wasn't real data anyway. It just annoyed me that this phase type couldn't fit the thing properly. So this was spent 5 hours. The algorithm was running for 5 hours, which maybe isn't a huge amount of time. But the problem was that this algorithm is maximizing the likelihood, and it should, in theory, just get better and better over time. It should, if you left this for it to run forever, your fit should just get better and better. But what we were seeing, it was sort of plateauing. It was getting to some point and never improving. And so I wanted to sort of fix that problem. Come back. Yeah, so in the course of writing these slides, I found this photo of the the guy who invented C. He's standing up there with the one with the beard standing up, and he's standing in front of the computer that he used when he invented C, like when he first wrote the programming language. So like, this is the ancient technology that we were dealing with. And the problems I had with it was that the whole thing was nothing was parallelized. Like that was not. It's not something that's very simple to do in C, to be honest. And it wasn't. And at the time in the late 90s, it wasn't seen as very important to parallelize the code. Whereas if we did a more modern implementation, would have used up all the extra cores that our computers would have. And some other things like the whole thing was handwritten by this one person. I have no idea who it is. They wrote all their own matrix multiplication code and all this kind of stuff, which would not at all be optimized. Anyway, so I told myself I shouldn't get too angry about this code, so I'll move on. But effectively, the code was running slowly because to fit the phase type, you need to look at every data point. So basically 110 data points we're looking at that's about the oldest person in our life table, and compute a matrix, a P by P matrix, which was an integral involving multiple matrix exponential multiplied together. So this is the reason why the whole algorithm took forever. And the solution they were using is to solve this integral by, they found a system of differential equations that the solution to that would be the integral. So they were actually just doing some kind of Euler scheme. Anyway, I'll skip ahead, but I rewrote the code in a modern language called Julia, where all this stuff is designed for scientific computing. It's as fast as it possibly can be. And if you're used to something like Python, it looks very similar. You just write what you want. In most scientific things are just built in. So, for example, the whole original program, 1,700 lines, just collapsed down to 300 lines. And I found one of the problems with the original code was that this differential system of ODEs, when they were solving it approximately, the solution would go negative when the result was obviously supposed to be a positive thing. And they solved that just by truncating these errors at 0. And that was feeding into my problem where the fit was not getting any better, because with an EM algorithm, when you set something to 0, it stays 0 forever. So I think that was the cause of my problems. So I just switched it over to use numerical quadrature at that point. Anyway, after all that effort, I got like almost no payoff for it, because even in Julia, this purple line here is the best fit I could get, compared to the red line, which was what the original could do. So that was very sad, considering I was rushing to complete it. Like, this is me on holiday in Japan, and the photo of me on the Shinkansen, the bullet trains, with my laptop writing this code, because Soren had said, this thing is due, we have a deadline, we've got to get it done. And I sent it over, and then I hear nothing from Soren for like a month. I'm like thinking, what happened? Is he on holiday? Is he sick? Like, he's an old man? Is he even dead? No one's told me. I don't know. So I emailed him, just like, hey, it's my birthday. Just made some excuse to email him. What's going on over there? Are we on holiday or something like that? Are we sick? In his reply, we are neither on holiday or sick. We are writing a new book in gardening. As a retired person, I can give some priority to these activities. So as it turns out, Soren could just ask the publisher to say, oh, we're not done, give us another few months, and that's where things ended. In the meantime, I landed in Lyon, beautiful city of Lyon, and met these gorgeous people that work here. And well, I actually knew that one already, but and just totally by accident, I found a paper. I wasn't trying to work on this project, but I just stumbled on a paper which was a new algorithm for doing this exact problem I was trying to solve. by this Japanese guy, Okamura. And so I raced to download his code, and it didn't work straight away. It crashed, like this R code in C++. So I spent all day fixing this C++ code, which was even more disgusting than the original C code I'd wasted a lot of time on. But I could eventually satisfy myself that I could get this fit that I've wanted the whole time. With 200 phases, I could fit this life table. Happy story. And so I was in the weird position now that I'd spent a lot of time failing, and I got the thing I wanted to do, and I still didn't believe I ought to be a co-author on this paper. But anyway, so we're still finishing off the paper, and so Soren and the other co-authors have figured out how you can write down the exact solution to this problem of the discounted payoff for these kind of insurance products, just in this simple matrix form. These integrals, he's also solved by hand for the cases of the guaranteed minimum benefit scheme and the high watermark payoff. And to refer to something I mentioned before, our same results can solve the problem where instead of just pay off at the time of death, if you looked at the limited horizon where it's whichever happens first, either some termination time t or death, and you want to solve that problem, the payoff t minimum capital T, tau capital T minimum, then you can approximate that constant time arbitrarily by this Erlang distribution, and then the minimum of two of these phase types is again phase types. So our exact same results solve a totally different problem we weren't even thinking about. So that's quite nice. So what conclusions do I have to give to you guys? So I end up finding this description from Synaide, which I quite agree with. Despite the fact that phase types are dense, the order of the approximating distribution can be disappointingly large, blah, blah, blah. But to summarize, basically I would say that the phase type theoretically can fit anything. And so if you're ever solving some problem which has exponential distributions in it, you can probably generalize it to phase type without much effort. And if you wanted a practical thing like I did, just to fit some data, I would just say throw the phase type at it and see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, then move on to something else. But if it does work with a small number of phases, it can solve your problem very quickly. Otherwise, if you're into programming and you haven't tried out the Julia programming language, they've just released version 1.0. So now the problem I had with this language is that I would write some code last year and walk away for a month and come back and my same code wouldn't work anymore because the language was changing so fast that my old code was just totally wrong now. Syntax was changing and the libraries were updating all the time. So now it's stable. If anyone's interested, you can go download it. Thank you for listening.
Right. Thank you, Patrick. Do we have a question from the audience?
That's simple.
So you have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
For instance, what kind of structure of phase type did you observe with your data? Because I saw like you had on your graph, when you went over your graph, you had like in the x-axis different labels. I think it was for different structure, like GC.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so this is using the original C code. My first instinct was just to use the general structure because I thought the more parameters, surely we could fit this thing first go. That would be the most flexible one. So that's what we're starting with, the general general structure with 20 phases, that's the red one. And then beyond that, the general structure with 35 and 40, it quickly hit this problem where you would just have way too many parameters to fit, and that your fitting would never even get past the initial starting point. So we started with that general, and that's why, since it failed so quickly, we moved on to the.
There is no particular structure, like it's not a mixture of Erlang, or it's not Cochian distribution.
It could be. I mean, one thing we did observe when we were doing, when you let it be whatever the algorithm thinks is the best, but then when you see what it finds is the best, oftentimes it's almost there's almost some structure that it finds, like it almost finds its own way to like a Cochian distribution where you're going in one direction through the phases. So since we saw that that's what the algorithm wanted to do anyway, and the general was failing and the general had way more parameters to fit, then we switched to the simpler ones.
Would that make the implementation simpler to assume a particular structure?
It would, in theory. So the C code, for example, doesn't take account that some matrices are, like if you have the structure, for example, this Cochian structure, then some of your matrices are like basically diagonal. There's a diagonal and an off diagonal, and the rest is just zeros. So in theory, you could tell what you're working with, that this thing is almost sparse matrix. Treat it specially. In C, they weren't doing that. In the Julia, I tried this. It's not so hard to tell Julia that you're working with a almost sparse matrix, but it didn't seem to have any effect.
Because, for instance, mixture of Erlang, it's particular type of base type, and they are known also to be dense. So some people might tell you that why would you work with such a sophisticated structure instead of just using a mixture of Erlang that everybody understands and then fits that. It's actually done a lot in actual science to model claim sizes. And so there's those people in Leuven, and they do use a mixture of Erlang, and also they do mixture of Erlang for the body of the distribution and then some Pareto tail, so that you model the claim sizes. So that's one thing to apply phase type to claim sizes. You need to have the phase type for the body and then something more heavy tail for the right tail of the distribution. Yeah,
that's true. To your first comment, this generalized Cochian, unless I'm pretty sure this is just another way to say mixture of Erlang. Like if you were to look at all the sample paths that you could go through, you would get.
There are several branches, and it goes to another, like it could be like some superposed.
Like if you just split apart all the different sample paths, so this is one possible sample path, which is just an exponential. So that's an Erlang. Yes. So that's a mixture with weight alpha 1 of that one, and then alpha 1 times blah times blah of this one. So it is. I spent almost a day trying to think about. Because there's a few concepts that are almost exactly the same, like the mixtures of Erlangs and mixtures of Erlangs with the exact same intensity parameter and things like that. And I can't really see a significant difference between each of them. But on your second point, I did forget to mention these phase types are never heavy-tailed. So even though they're dense and positive distributions, you'll never actually get a heavy-tailed thing out of it. So if you, sorry?
Well, I think it's also like you mentioned Leonardo. It's one of these things. That you can approximate an heavy-tail distribution with a phase type.
With some people infinite mixture of phase types.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that effectively just like a phase type multiplied by another random variable, and that you can figure out. And that is another way of representing the infinite mixture of phase types. And
can you do inference with this? Can you infer that?
Oh, I think they can say what if this is phase type, what the properties of the other one has to be to make it the whole thing heavy tail. Okay. I think that's their result. I should know this because they were working at the same university as me, but I could find the paper if it was necessary.
Well, I remember seeing Leonardo presenting that, and I was it was very technical, and I was skeptical because it seems that it was really really difficult to apply it.
Yeah.
Data set.
True. I mean, now that I've struggled so much with just the normal face type, I would agree. Probably it's even harder to get this working properly.
So for now, there is no other like real data application than this mortality table, like for instance, claim sizes.
Oh, well, we haven't done it, but yeah, of course, in risk theory, there's lots of papers with the face type. Is far more common in other parts of insurance math than in life insurance. It seems that no one uses it in life insurance, basically. I don't know why.
And then I was also curious about the identification problem you talked about. Like, for instance, you could have two face types that have different generator, right, the matrix,
Yeah.
but that are the same. Is it really a problem?
I don't see it as a huge
I
problem.
think on the example you presented, the face type would correspond to a sum of independent exponential, or a sum of...
Yeah. It's basically an Erlang distribution, and you go through it in one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. So you sum exchangeable random variables, and so you sum like the order of summation.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
So that's.
It was actually kind of interesting because for these face types, the theoretical side that Soren was working on, you need to do this. You need to look at the reversed Markov chain, and use some of the properties from that to get our final pricing results. This is actually an example of the Markov chain being reversed. If I were to start in this state rather than state one, there's I guess perhaps the problem lies in that the optimizer, like the algorithm, doesn't know that these multiple options don't matter to us, and that they might waste time bouncing between them or something like that. Perhaps it would confuse the algorithm in that way, and a fitting algorithm, that's about the only way I could think it'd be a problem.
Like from a statistical point of view, once you have inferred that it's space type and you try to do a goodness of fit, for instance, to check your model, this won't matter. Because you just look at the CDF, it will be the same. It would not matter too much, probably you can forget what's in the face type.
That's true.
Are there other questions? About Australia, maybe? All right, let's thank Patrick then.